As much as I'd like to listen to Hugh Hewitt, I really wanted to get out this message that I forgot to mention yesterday. I tried to keep the video yesterday short, both videos, and doing so, I think I left out a really important point as far as the Jewish aspects of the Columbian Exchange. You could see yesterday's video, we discussed a little bit about the Jewish aspects of Columbus Day, and these were two things that I mentioned, but I didn't really elaborate on the Jewish approaches to these concepts that were really even had somewhat of a theological aspect to them that I wanted to share. I had mentioned yesterday that there were two items that were brought to Europe from the Columbian Exchange that did not exist in Europe before that time, and those were potatoes and tobacco. And both of those figure prominently, particularly in the Hasidic Jewish tradition and in several other Jewish traditions, as almost being holy items, really, to a certain extent, or being used in holy items. And it's a fascinating thing of how something that was new, that did not exist in these cultures until relatively recently, were incorporated so much into our religious practices and our cultural practices, many of those cultural practices having some sort of a religious flavor to them at the very least. There's very little disconnect between religion and culture in the various Jewish cultures. There are the difference between religion and culture, for the most part, is what aspects are more fundamental, the more religious aspects, and which aspects are local customs and culture. But those things do have religious meaning to them, if they don't, even though they don't have religious obligation in them. And so, particularly these two items, potatoes and tobacco, figure greatly in the religious and cultural life, particularly of Jews from Eastern European backgrounds, particularly those from the Hasidic cultures. How so? What are the aspects of it? I'll deal with the more controversial one first, is tobacco. I personally, I don't smoke very often. I think the last time I smoked a cigar was on Purim, maybe 3 years ago. I kind of lost count. Every now and then on Purim I'll smoke a cigar, specifically with a religious intention. As a devotion to celebrate Purim, and even though I'm not a mystic who knows all of these aspects of all the secrets behind these things, but we can, like my Rav says, Rabbi Fishbein says, we could just repeat the words that we hear, even if we don't understand the full depth of them, which is all we do all the time anyway. It's the same thing when we're learning Chumash or Gemara. Rabbi Bar Tzadok, Zolkazon Zayin, said that essentially, there's no difference. No difference. He said, people tend to think, the Zohar is a Kabbalistic work. The Kisvei Ari are Kabbalistic works. And he said, the truth of the matter is, yes, those are Kabbalistic works. Those are mystical works. But the Talmud is even more mystical than those, and the Mishnah is even more mystical than those. And the Tanakh is the most mystical book of all. The Bible itself is, and really it goes even sometimes higher and higher in levels, as we essentially, the mysticism hidden within Scripture is there. So again, all the time we're just repeating words that we don't really understand, and our hope and prayer is that when we get to the next world, we'll develop a deeper understanding than we had on this earth, and that's really what it's all about. and that's what we're investing into and developing an appreciation for and a hope for when we study Torah in this world. There's a certain aspect of it. There's more to it, but that's certainly an aspect to our Torah study, to really develop appreciation for those things that we will be engaging in the next world. So we should find pleasure in them, because those are the greatest pleasures. That's something that I've been discussing a lot recently, but also what we've often been told from the Svarim Kadeshim is that, when we learn here in this world, we're going to learn on a deeper level in the next world, and quite often from the original, we'll be sharing, space in the world to come with those who we've developed a relationship through by studying their teachings. And so, when we learn a Mishnah and we're quoting a particular Tana or Mara, we're going to get to sit in their study hall and hear the teachings from them. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kahanim, Bayan Rava, Rabbi Kiva. Will, maybe we might not be so close to them. Maybe we'll be sitting in the back of the room. But that'll be our reward for, and so too, it's often been discussed. The same thing. People who are closer to us historically, who we develop a devotion to. We learn the Rebbe Melech, we learn the Arachaim HaKodesh. We'll get to be there and listen to them teach. So anyway, Baal Shem Tov HaKodesh taught that there are very fine nitzotzes to Kedusha, very fine sparks of holiness that are concealed in tobacco that could only be revealed. These are some of the last things that are left for us to make a tikkun on, for us to rectify, in order to perfect this world. That's a major aspect of Loranic Kabbalah, of the teachings of the Ariya Kodesh, is that, the Shviras HaKelim and Tzaisis HaKedusha, that there are sparks of holiness hidden throughout the world, and when we engage in devotions to God, using the things of this world, we are rectifying and redeeming those sparks, those lost pieces of the broken puzzle that we have to put together by engaging in devotion. And that's also part of the reason why many tzaddikim encouraged people to travel as much as possible and things like that. We'll move I don't want to focus so much on all of these aspects. However, there is this particular aspect of the tobacco being, for example, I think it was the Rebbe Melech who said, or maybe it was the Berditchever, I don't know, a friend of mine who smokes a lot, he said this, that the sign of a Jew is someone, he smokes during the weekdays and he uses, smelling tobacco, shmek tabak, snuff, on the Sabbath when we're not allowed to smoke. And that, and there are those who explain that this is connected to the Ketoris in the Beis HaMikdash, or the various other things of smoke going up. It's fascinating that is actually, now I do not believe that in any way any of the Hasidic masters, including the Baal Shem Tov HaKodesh, had any direct communication with the Native American peoples who had similar beliefs about tobacco. The Native Americans believe still to this day that tobacco is a sacred item, and that the smoke brings their prayers up to heaven. Again, I shouldn't generalize. There are many different types of Native Americans, but it tends to be a common theme in the Native American spiritual traditions, and many other spiritual traditions as well, of burning incense, and so forth, that there is this aspect. Although we say that the Ketorah is, Yavar Davar Shebechashai V'Chapral Davar Shebechashai, it's probably a little bit more of a refined concept. That's something that comes, that's somewhat esoteric in its form, will atone for those esoteric things. If we have the wrong types of thoughts and things, the more refined sins, so forth. I've heard others also explain the concept of smoking, that when you get on fire for God, you disappear. Your ego is eliminated, and so too, and that's a metaphor that we can learn with a cigarette. Again, I don't smoke. I don't follow this practice. But again, you've seen other tzaddikim, they also have the Indian. The Gemara says, Cham Motzei Shabbos Malukma. That's something hot on Saturday night after the Sabbath brings healing. And the Rashi says that it means to drink a hot drink or to bathe in hot water, which is something that we practice. However, the Lelever Rebbe said that a cigarette or smoking something, a cigar, a cigarette, a pipe, whatever it is, also has that aspect of healing on Saturday night. And so the Lelever Rebbes, they make a big avodah of smoking Saturday night. And so too, probably one of the biggest tzaddikim of our generation, the Sklener Rebbe Shlita. I was many times as a bacher, was there Motzei Shabbos, and he makes an avoda out of smoking a few puffs from a cigarette. Doesn't smoke the whole thing, just takes a few puffs. But while he's smoking, they sing the tune of Solokok Shmar from Kalaver Dynasty. I'm a shtickle chassid of the Kalaver. My Rebbe is the Kalaver Rebbe. He should have for Shlema. Not that I'm really so much a Kalaver chassid as much as that I'm a chassid of the Kalaver Rebbe. I don't follow all their minhagim. I don't, but certain things I do. But I'm a big chassid of the Kalaver Rebbe. And you should have Shlema Moshe ben Rezel. He's in the hospital right now. He needs very much tefillah. He's a very holy man. He was Masar Kedusha in my chasana. He officiated my wedding. I a very close relationship with him over the years. He's the first Hasidic Rebbe I ever met. But anyway, So the legend goes that tune was actually one of the tunes that was sung in the temple, and the refrain at the end, Yiboneh Mikdash from Tzur Mishalo, that's what they sing by the Sklener Rebbe Shlita, Motzei Shabbos. But the Sklener Rebbe says no one should copy him with this. But we recognize that by tzaddikim there is certain Indian. Maybe it's not for the, and what I personally feel is that perhaps now that science has revealed that it's not healthy to have these things, even though in the old days science believed it was healthy to smoke, I think Nishtana Teva, really. I know a lot of people might think this is kind of kooky for me to say this. We do have a concept, it's even mentioned in Chazal, that certain times nature actually transforms and changes. Perhaps there's a connection to what people talk about now, the Mandela effect. Probably not, but maybe. But that there can be transformations in nature, and that yes, at one point in history it was healthy to smoke, and now it's not healthy to smoke. I don't think that that's so far-fetched, particularly from a Jewish ideology. And why was Nishtana Teva? This is just my own idea. Is that perhaps those Nitzaitis where we could be much closer than we think to Mashiach, even though I try not to become obsessed with eschatology, and just try to live a normal life, and that's it, and not be like, oh, the world's coming to an end tomorrow, or Mashiach's coming tomorrow, whatever. I wait every day that he should come. That's it. But it's not healthy to obsess over these things, and certainly not to obsess over the person of the Messiah and things like that. Just live life and follow Torah mitzvahs, and that's it. Anyway, but this concept, it could be that those nitzotzos, those sparks of holiness that the Baal Shem Tov was talking about, have already been redeemed, and so therefore, or most of them have been redeemed. There's only a few left that the tzaddikim have to redeem. People like the Sklener Rebbe, people like the Rebbes of Lelev, other tzaddikim who do smoke and engage in it as an avoda, and not out of taiva, but out of sincere religious devotion. And also, that's a level that all of us perhaps could be on a day like Purim, which is a very elevated day, and then, that's something, I see, like, for example, I know, like, the Satmar Rebbe from Monroe, he always smokes a cigar on Purim. I don't know if his brother in Williamsburg does, but I was there in Monroe when he smokes the cigar, and I don't believe he smokes all year round. I think that's the one time a year that he smokes. And even, I know a lot of people be upset about it, but even on little children they give to smoke on Purim. Again, it's probably not a good idea, but whatever it is, but it's something that happens in this culture. But again, and still, most Hasidic synagogues, many Hasidic synagogues, it's very common to pass around smelling tobacco on the Sabbath. Even people who don't smoke will smell tobacco, smell snuff, and they have different flavors and things. But again, the intention should be, I'm not saying that it always is, but the intention should be a holy intention of devotion to God, somewhat similar to the Ketorah, somewhat similar to the smoke that exists in the temple. Not that it actually is a sacrifice, but it's a way to remind us of that. It's Zeichel Mikdash, that type of thing. So that's tobacco. There's more we could talk about it, but I don't want to talk too much, and I'm almost to work. And I know people ask me about other things. I plan to make this video 2 minutes, and it's already almost 20 minutes, and I still haven't gotten to potatoes yet. Potatoes, like we said, this phenomenon of the Irish potato famine is quite strange. That here you have an item that did not exist 300 years earlier in that area. It was unknown, and to the point where the people became so dependent on it, that's all they had. Similarly, we could say the same thing in the Jewish traditions, particularly Eastern European Jewish traditions. The potato becomes ubiquitous on Passover. Where the Ashkenazic tradition is to avoid more than only the 5 grains that are actually forbidden according to the Torah, but also many other similar legumes and grain-like items that could easily be mistaken for that. And it's a controversial thing, and I know many people oppose it, but it's and even some of my rebbeim, but still there's an Inyan minhag b'seinu b'yadeinu. Even if essentially it's wrong, but that being said, it transformed the culture. That here you had something that was introduced new, that since there was no connection to it, there was no prohibition made against it, even though there are some who suggested perhaps it should be prohibited. So that's that is the potato. And so throughout Passover we make flour out of potatoes, potato starch, and so forth, and that is basically, most of what we're eating on Passover, particularly people who in the Hasidic culture don't eat matzah that got wet or anything, or that we don't eat matzah balls, matzah brie, things like that except on the last day of Passover. And so these are aspects of that as well. So again, because of the Columbian Exchange, that's why we had something to eat. Similarly, there's been introduced in many homes the quinoa. A lot of people will eat on Passover, but even all year long, potatoes are used in traditional Jewish foods, many of which have religious connotation to them, like the potato kugel and the potatoes in the cholent, and other traditional foods. A lot of people, even though in the culture that I'm familiar with, that I've adopted, potato pancakes are not so common, but in the family where I grew up, and I still eat potato pancakes on Hanukkah for that reason, because these are things that I grew up with. But it's interesting how, like, for example, the Satmarov only ate potato kugel as a devotion on a special day, like when Shabbos fell on Rosh Chodesh, or things like that, when you had an extra Torah. Other tzaddikim insisted on eating potato kugel every Shabbos, but the Satmarov said no. The main kugel is the Lakshan kugel, and the what we call kishka, the cholent kugel. It's not really kishka. Those are the Satmarov said are the main kugels. I've heard that the reason for that is because they contain flour. An interesting thing, though, is that my Baba Shalom would always put matzah meal in her potato kugels and her potato latkes. So there was that flour aspect to it anyway. But still, here we have the introduction, and these items, and many other tzaddikim did say that the potato kugel was a whole. I mean, I know one rabbi who I know, he highly encourages people to every Shabbos eat potato kugel. I personally, I find it easier to follow the Satmarov's example of only eating potato kugel on special occasions, but that being said, we do have these different possibilities in what we're talking about. So, and even so, like I said, other popular foods, potato knishes, and that's I don't know any religious devotion to potato knish. I'm sure there is something, but how the potato turned from an item that was unknown to something that became essential in our diets in many European cultures, not only Jewish cultures like we discussed, the Irish culture. This is all from the Columbian Exchange, and like I said, in a theological level, the Baal Shem Tov thought perhaps we could say the same types of things that the Baal Shem Tov said about tobacco, we could say about potatoes as well. Even though it was not a traditional food, it became a traditional food. We tend to think of the potato kugel as the more traditional kugel, a lot of people, but the fact of the matter is that it's not, that the more traditional kugel would be flour-based kugels. So, these are things that we can also talk about, like, essentially the potato is, again, this aspect of, there's a theological aspect of the Columbian Exchange, being that we now can rectify the world with new items that were henceforth unknown. And in a sense, so therefore, Columbus Day, in a sense, someone was asking about Yom Yerushalayim and Hayir and things like that. You want to talk about Reishis, Tzmichas, Gulaseinu, things like that. In a sense, the Columbian Exchange did a lot more for bringing the Geula than all the Zionists put together. All right. God bless. Take care.